Howdy, y'alls. Welcome back. It's me, Dr. Edwards, giving you a little brief lecture on Module 3, Fighting the Good Fight, Political Action and Anthropological Research. Now, how should I start this? This is a really important topic, to put it mildly, because, well, the deeper you get into anthropology, the more you see that everything is political. And I mean everything from gendered signs on bathroom doors to the shows we watch on TV to the schools our kids go to and the schools that we actually attend ourselves. Everything can be looked at in a political perspective. All right. So this kind of underscores that, well, actually, let me back up. Politics, to define it briefly, is the negotiation of power, all right? And power is the ability to kind of control things. Many people think of power as money, or money as power. That's a very limited perspective. Actually, I've mentioned this a couple of times on the discussion board this week. There are two great scholars, great critical thinkers that I highly recommend that you guys familiarize yourself with. The first is a guy named Michel Foucault, and yeah, absolutely amazing. He really explores the relationship between knowledge and power. They're not really separate, all right? And there's another scholar, another critical thinker, his name is Antonio Gramsci. And Gramsci he really looks at how that relationship of knowledge and power, how it's actually used in society or societies, particularly at the national level. I'm talking about national identity and national consciousness, things like that, how to be a good citizen. And it really plays into this idea in anthropology, a concept that we call hegemony. Now, hegemony, how to put it mildly, is really about the elite maintaining control. All right, this is born out of Marxist theory. Think of hegemony as how, as the powers that be convince you that you are playing a vital and essential role in the maintenance of society. Now, they're doing that to help reinforce and maintain their position of control, right? Their position of power. So yeah, these are some key relationships and associations we want to be able to apply in this week. And we have a couple of articles, really nice stuff. One, a newspaper article, online newspaper, magazine. Was it A Problem Like No Other, Science in Politics? Yeah, science gains knowledge and has issues in how knowledge is actually applied and affected. That's where the politics come in, because the politics is all about negotiating how that actually is played out. One of the examples that the article highlights is climate change, right? And we just so happen to be at a unique situation in the politics of our country, with Trump being our new president. He's essentially eviscerated the EPA and is a stated climate change denier. Now, those things have effects. Science we often think of as having, the insight, right? But there's a big disconnect between insight and real knowledge, wisdom, if you would, all right? Because, there's lots of things we can do, all right? But should we? That's the ethical consideration. Like, genetically modified organisms, GMOs. This is a real popular topic. Should it be limited? Should we be genetically modifying tomatoes, right? Potatoes, corn, soybeans, you name it. There are folks out there that are that are, well, from their perspective, um, and there is some value to this. Let me stress that. You know, making a more resilient staple crop, right? That can be a good thing, right? But the process that we go through to get to that really involves some ethical considerations, like, you know, you're modifying genes, you're creating something via science that is in direct competition with what nature provided us. Okay. um, yeah, it gets a little gray, a little fuzzy, right? It's not so clear, black and white. Um, but usually, one of the key things that, you know, anthropologists really focus on is the values at play in these various debates. All right, um, going back to Trump and his denial of climate change. Do you think there might be some underlying reasons behind that? You know, you look at his pushing through of the Dakota Access Pipeline and others. You know, that those one really kind of helps support the other. If you see what I'm saying, all right. You can't be a supporter of climate change and be gung ho about exploiting natural gas, oil sands, things like that. The two don't really mix. All right, but one is definitely better for the economy in some regards, based on our history, actually, our industrial history. It would tend to suggest that, you know, there's greater opportunity through the exploitation of specific resources. However, there's an equal argument on the other side that there's all sorts of new jobs and opportunities that can be created through alternative energy. All right. So again, it's not black and white. It is subtle shades of gray. So yeah, the values are what we kind of look at on either side of that discussion, and you'll see, you know, it's more of a spectrum, not distinct one or the other. So this is something that I really encourage you all to kind of consider in the examples that we explore. Let's see here. Yeah, a lot of these debates are actually a reflection of competing cultural values. I don't know, use my own research as a good example. And I study wildlife use. I'm not for wildlife use, but I don't really have anything against it either. Um, there are lots of people that look at me and say, "Oh, hey, whoa, you're really kind of, you know, perpetuating something there that is bad and wrong." Well, here comes the cultural relativist. Are they our critters? No, they belong to other folks. Does the West have some authority over biodiversity on a global scale? I hope not. If so, that's pretty colonial, right? Suggesting that you have some authority and privilege that oversees everyone else. Yeah, so you kind of see what I'm saying. There are values underneath that kind of support different perspectives, and that's one of the great things that anthropology is good at exploring and understanding. So yeah, I don't mean to move too fast, but I'm going to move on over to our next article. Crossroads where identity, politics, and anthropology and activism intersect. Now, this is a great article that was kind of a product of the postmodern revolution in anthropology. Postmodern, you go, huh? What? What's that? Well, kind of think of it as distinct eras in anthropology. You have like classical anthropology, which is back in the 1800s. Then it kind of moved into modern anthropology, which would be kind of the turn of the century onwards. And then in the 60s came this realization, oh, hey, we're not completely objective. All right, that we're innately biased. We all have our unique lenses that we see the world through and understand the world through. And that's really getting at the postmodern aspect, all right? That you cannot separate the observer from the subject. One influences the other and vice versa, all right? Intersubjectivity is a fancy way we talk about that. Now, I've given you all a classic line to keep in mind. All observation is positioned from somewhere, right? This underscores that there is no objective truth, right? Particularly when it comes to people, right? And things people do. I mean, in physics, we might be able to say, oh, hey, yeah, no, you can't violate the law of gravity. It is. It is a singular truth. But people, not so much. People are plural. They are complex. They are diverse. They change. They're not static. I am not the person I used to be. 10 years from now, I will not be the same person I am now. So, this really, when you kind of look at what anthropologists do, this really underscores a very important point, the idea of positionality. That even though you may be a researcher that's trying to objectively study something and understand something, you can never really separate yourself from it. I mean, why are you actually interested in that thing to begin with? Why? Use myself as an example. Why am I all freaky about wildlife use in West Africa? Well, I kind of got a thing for creepy crawly critters, particularly reptiles. My dad was a herpetologist. My mom a psychologist. Go figure. Psychology, human behavior, understanding the human mind, herpetology, reptiles, amphibians. Put the two together and go wonder I become an environmental anthropologist that studies wildlife use in West Africa. It's not rocket science, but it's an important relationship to understand that we all have our inherent bias. Our inherent perspective is always colored. You can never get away from it. Now, this article is really great because, first of all, I recommend that you read the whole thing, not just the pages that are highlighted, all right, that you should read. The whole thing is a great read because you're actually getting introduced to a feminist perspective in anthropology here, and it's a really important perspective. I can't stress it enough. Anthropology tends to be a male-dominated profession or discipline. I think that adding a female perspective, a feminist perspective in particular, is very important. And that really kind of gets down to issues of identity, culture, and power. When it comes to identity, we're specifically looking at issues of race, class, and gender. Look at kind of contemporary debates about transgender folks and, which bathroom they use, right? It's inherently a biased issue. People will see it in one way, another way, or they might be able to kind of put a few ideas together and be able to have a bit of a plural perspective, if you would. I try to think of myself that way because I can see that, they think of it this way, and they think of it this way, and there are these folks over here that think of it completely different. But if you really kind of pick at that issue, peel the layers back, there's a heck of a lot about, assumptions about sexuality. Let me stress. Gender is not sexuality. The two are not the same. No. The two are inherently different. They are separate. Now, we might see some patterns associated with them, but they're not definitive patterns. I mean, I might call myself, a male, that I'm heterosexual, but you know what? I'm being silly here, so take me with a grain of salt. I may be sexually attracted to penguins. Okay? That kind of gets my idea across that, gender, biology, and sexual orientation or sexuality, all completely different things. And they're usually, very intimate, very individualistic. Everyone will do it differently. And what's really cool is they will tend to change through their lifetime. They will go through distinct phases of feeling or identifying as particular things. Sorry, that got a little off track there. Refocusing back onto identity politics, anthropology, and activism. One of the great things in here, even though she doesn't talk about it directly, there's a kind of a theoretical perspective in anthropology called performance theory. If you've been reading the discussions, I've mentioned it a couple of times because some folks have actually highlighted it without knowing what it was, and it was a great observation. So let me give you some details on it. Judith Butler, a premier feminist critic, she put forth this idea that essentially you can think of everyone being on a stage, right? We are all performing all the time. Can't get away from it. She particularly looked at how people perform gender, right? But you can use the idea to really look at anything. You can look at institutions, right? We just did a discussion about the Enola Gay and its partial representation of history, and you gotta question, well, why would they present it that way? Why do they omit this other stuff and only talk about some stuff? Well, that's performance, right? And they're actually, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it's towards a specific ends. And this is a really helpful approach to kind of looking at these issues that we do. This article, the author is really exploring her own identity and how she has come to that through some real kind of introspective, reflexive observations, and it's really good stuff. So definitely read the whole thing. But I want to give a bit on kind of the focus area here, page 206 to 212. Inward stretch and outward reach, I think, is the name of that first section that we're supposed to focus on. Now, this is really talking about, how we awaken a feminist consciousness, and that the author encourages us to get involved, and that leads to activism, right? Now, there's a fundamental debate, and anthropologists are up to their eyeballs in it because of kind of our disciplinary focus. People, go figures. People are contentious, to say the least, controversial. But the debate over human rights and activism, what is the role of anthropology? We have the United Nations that puts forth the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and says that people have the right to bodily integrity, the right to education, the right to, have a healthy life. That's a very truncated synopsis of it, but you can go online and look it up in its entirety if you want. But what about things that, that we feel are wrong, right? I think probably one of the premier examples to use for that is the issue of female genital cutting. Now, depending on what sort of source you looked up, they might actually call it female genital mutilation. And I try to avoid that term, FGM, M for mutilation, because mutilation is a value-laden term. It is judging. And as an anthropologist, I try to, we all make our judgments, but I try to separate them. And that's kind of our goal, to actually separate our understandings from our own personal feelings. Female genital mutilation, very value-laden, very judgmental, really only sees such practices in a negative light, a light that underscores and illustrates women as being dominated and subjectified to male wishes, male values. Some groups will cite specific religious scripture that says, oh, we're supposed to do this. Other groups just cite, no, it's just part of our cultural heritage. This is who we are. This is how we do it. And they will actually cite that this procedure is actually is a rite of passage that a girl has to go through to become a woman in order to get married and have children. So it has a lot to do with identity there. All right, that you're not a complete person until this has happened to you. Now, on a personal level, I abhor such things. I think that yes, female genital cutting really works against women. Even though cultures might say that, oh, this is just how we do things, a relativistic perspective. I still find that it really works against women overall. It actually is kind of a key example within the universal subjugation of women around the globe. So, you see what I'm kind of getting at here is, we might say that based on a human rights perspective, female genital cutting is wrong, right? It's an invasion of bodily integrity. It's not done with free choice. That sort of argument. But then on the flip side, you have, well, this is a rite of passage that women actually cite as, I am not complete until I have gone through this. Now, there are also plenty of examples of women that say, oh, hey, no, I am not down with this. I am getting out of here. I do not want this to happen to me or my children, my daughters. Yeah. I'm pretty lucky because I lived and worked in West Africa, where female genital cutting is pretty prevalent. Over 80% of the population, female population, is cut to some degree. And given my medical background, I was actually asked to be in attendance to a lot of those things. So I got a really unique perspective. I actually got to hang out with midwives. And there's actually several different forms of female genital cutting that are performed. Everything from light cutting, shall we say, and it may be the labia majora that are just slightly incised to make blood, to express blood, and that's the limit of it, to full infibulation, which is often involves full clitoridectomy and stitching up of the labia majora, only offering a small opening for urine and menses. So, I mean, there's a wide range. Let me make that real clear. Where I was, light cutting, scarification, clitoridectomy, and infibulation, all of them were practiced by different groups. The Malinke that I was with, they tended to practice light cutting, sometimes with a partial clitoridectomy. Anyway, probably more than you ever wanted to know. The point is, I got involved, right? I had issues with it, and so this was an area where I got active, and it was an everyday thing. Given that men and women there live fairly separate lives, you have the female realm and the male realm. Female realm tends to be oriented around the house and raising children, and the male realm tends to be focused in the public sphere. Outside of the home. Either they got a job, they work in the fields, whatever. And so, yeah, as a guy, I would tend to hang out with a bunch of guys, and they'd talk about these things, and those were opportunities where I was like, hey, I'd ask questions usually, to start with. I wouldn't just be like getting on my soapbox and be like, oh, that's bad, that's wrong. No, but ask them, seriously, why is this important to you? What is the value that you find in it? And often males would cite, religious texts, or to control female sexuality was a common one, and they would cite, without doing it, women were just out of control. It's, as a Western scientist, no. But from a local cultural perspective, that is how they saw it. So, I would use those opportunities to ask questions, share counterexamples. Well, in the West, we do it different. We don't cut women, and we'd get into lengthy discussions, and the result really isn't the point. It's actually just taking the time to question those things. And this is really important. Every anthropologist will come across these in their work. All right, you're going to come across things that you're like, okay, this isn't just a culturally relative perspective that I can just agree with. All right, there's something within me that is against that I find it to be a violation, and because you're an anthropologist, you're often in a unique position to help affect change on that. Now, when it comes to female genital cutting, approaching it as a cultural issue is not a good idea. rather approaching it as a medical issue is, right? Because that takes the judgment out. That takes judging cultural practices right out of the picture. You present it as a medical issue that impacts the well-being and the health of the women. And most importantly, where I used to work, producing children, all right? A woman that is fully infibulated and goes to have a kid will have increased risks over non-infibulated women. So if they want more kids, maybe not do the infibulation, right? In fact, some groups that I worked with, they've done away with it altogether. They now have kind of celebratory parades of girls. Rather than cut the girls, they parade the girls around, and it's a welcoming to womanhood, and they're recognized, and their value within the community is also recognized. So that's kind of a quick run through of some key concepts and ideas, perspectives to have in mind for this week's work. And yeah, as usual, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, anything at all, I'm right here. Just give me a buzz, shoot me an email, a text, whatever you need. I'm at your service. Have a great one. Catch you another time.